Hello and welcome to the lecture video for Chapter 5, which covers market outcomes and tax incidents. In the last lecture series, we looked at the concept of elasticity, and we saw that there were four main elasticity measures that we wanted to know about. We learned about price elasticity of demand. We learned about income elasticity of demand, cross-price elasticity of demand, and price elasticity of supply. And we saw that these concepts were a nice extension of our supply and demand model. They provide us with a little bit more information. They give us a little bit more insight into what's going on potentially in our supply and demand model. So in this chapter, we're going to learn another extension or several extensions of the supply and demand model. But before we begin, man, I really wish I could do this with you guys. Dutch auctions are pretty fun. And I totally would have done this with you guys if we were in class. So instead of actually doing one, I'll just talk to you a little bit about it. So a Dutch auction is one type of auction. So you've probably heard of English auctions, which is where the price starts relatively low, and there's an auctioneer speaking very quickly, and people slowly bid up the price, and then the auction ends when no one will bid any higher, and the highest winning bidder, the highest bidder wins the auction. So the Dutch auction is a little bit different. It's similar in some ways, but it starts at a very, very high price, a price that presumably no one would be willing to buy the good at. And then it slowly falls. The price slowly falls, and the first person to bid wins the item at whatever price the price has fallen to. And so the way I've done this before is I've had like a basket of goodies, and I've auctioned off the basket of goodies using a Dutch auction. And the reason it's called Dutch auction is because this is how they actually sell tulips in the Netherlands. So that's where it gets its name from. But it's really interesting auction. And it relates to this material because, I'll ask you at the end of the video how you think the Dutch auction relates to what we're talking about. All right, so our big questions for this chapter are, number one, what are consumer surplus and producer surplus? I will point out right now that the previous concept of surplus that we learned about when quantity supplied is greater than quantity demanded, that surplus is different than what we're talking about here in this chapter with consumer and producer surplus. Okay, so just be aware that there are different things. Number two, when is a market efficient? So we've talked a lot about efficiency here and there. In this chapter, we're going to talk about what it means for a market to be efficient. And then thirdly, we want to understand why taxes create something called deadweight loss in what would otherwise be efficient markets. Okay, so these are our big questions for this chapter.